So here we go. Two ideas I will consider in the lesson on soul and body. The first idea is a focus on Jacob as the story of spiritualization that brings him out of his identifying himself as a flawed human being to a much clearer sense of a harmony of existence because of his identity, quote, as a prince that has, quote, power with God and man. As text from Genesis says, I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. I have investigated Jacob in Bible study and have gotten a clear sense of why this man was prepared to turn somewhat from being steeped in material life in ways not God-directed to some harmony in life under the control of soul or spirit. His name Jacob means supplanter and carries the meaning appropriate for a man who bought his elder brother's birthright and stole his blessing. By the way, Jacob's story in Genesis occurs about BC 1837, and if you like some sense of timeline in biblical stories, David operated about 900 BC, so their tales are separated by 900 years or so. Jacob and Esau were born as twins to Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah had been barren for many years and asked God for a son in prayer. God answered her prayer, but with twins, and with the statement that the elder Esau, he came out first, will be supplanted by Jacob, who was born holding on to Esau's foot with his little hand. Though God promised dominance to Jacob, his mother and he were too impatient to wait for God to act. And so by trickery and wicked ambition, Jacob bought Esau's birthright and stole his blessing by deceiving his aged father Isaac. What he would have gotten from God as prominence, instead when he went deep into materialistic thinking to get it, and experienced trickery and deceit as he had practiced in his earlier life. Terrible trickery and deceit from Laban, for whom he worked for many years. The scene in the lesson is, of course, on the night before he must meet his older brother, who has sworn to kill him. But as he wrestled with nameless impartation of divine love, says Miss Eddy, his identity is spiritualized and he gains the name Israel. In fact, he has in his camp with him, which he is returning to the land of his fathers, and has to meet fearfully Esau. 11, or I think the 12th one was not yet born. 11 sons, which will become 12 sons eventually, and who will go down in history as the 12 tribes of Israel. They were born to him from 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, and 2 handmaidens. One of those sons was, in fact, to be Joseph, later sold into Egypt and savior of thousands under the guidance of God in time of great famine. Just one more. Here. Why Jacob has always been, and he comes to peace with his brother Esau, which I think we all know from earlier lessons. And Esau says, I have enough, which is a wonderful thing to hear. But Jacob still dispenses great gifts to Esau also in his changed identity. Why Jacob has always been listed as a patriarch rather than Isaac has been speculated upon by Bible scholars for many years. Isaac, after all, was the child of promise, born to Sarah when she was in her 90s. In fact, he seems to have faded from importance in the Bible. He is not even mentioned as returning from the intended sacrifice of him by his father. There's no mention of his coming back with his father. He seems to have become very unimportant. And he appears only as a kind of mother's boy who finally, as an aged old man, shows partiality among his sons, coat of many colors. I have puzzled over this, and I advance a little theory. I've paralleled Jacob with Saul or Paul, that here was this really wicked trickster, finally became the progenitor of the 12 tribes of Israel and the father of the wonderful Joseph. I've compared him to Saul, later Paul, who of course was a terrible persecutor until he was given a spiritual insight that made him follow God's will and spread Christianity, doing God's work. The all-loving, all-seeing, all-acting divine rules. What human being can know the mind of God? I just think it's most interesting that these two wicked men ultimately become the support for God's work. An interesting other note, excuse me, on the wrestling scene. Jacob asks for the name of the wrestler, but the name is withheld, and the new name for Jacob is offered. Now, tradition in many old religions is that if you can get the name of the god, and that's in quotes, are able to handle him to a much greater degree to get what you want. So Jacob, before he is spiritualized, is still negotiating and trying to get from God what has not been given to him. Okay. The second idea from the lesson that I'd like to explore is the golden sphere, the temple of the living God, and the responsive reading, "Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For we are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's." And so what I investigated was, in the anthology articles that I often turn to, is something about how Christian Scientists could explain to others who are becoming interested in the religion or confused about what its stances are. And in Anthology Classic Articles 2, page 84, the title is a quote from Mrs. Eddy, "Take Possession of Your Body," by William Milford Correll. Yes, Correll. And it's just very straightforward. In Science and Health, it begins with Key to the Scriptures. Mary Baker Eddy says, "Take possession of your body and govern its feeling and action." This simple statement holds out hope to many who seem to be slaves to the human sense of body. When we learn that this body is a product of thought, we may begin to see that one can fulfill this demand and realize some measure of dominion. Christian Science shows how this may be done. Small quote. In his basic teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus pointed to the thinking of the individual as the key to the control of his body. He repeatedly stressed this fact in various ways, warning his followers against hatred and malice, against fear and hypocrisy. It's obvious he said nothing about muscles and nerves, about brain and reflexes. The direction of his instructions seemed to conform to the statement from Proverbs, "As he, a man, thinketh in his heart, so is he." When we realize that the human body does not exist as an external object, but that it exists in consciousness as an expression of thought, we are well on the road to exercising dominion over it. Jesus came to do the will of God. This was his authority and gave him control over that's my son, he'll call later. He taught us that as we purify our thinking and bring it into accord with the nature of divine love, we can expect God's law of harmony to be manifest in the healing of sickness and sin. I think a newcomer would find that rather helpful in understanding where the body stands in Christian Science. The other one is a very, very straightforward 1, 2, 3, this is it idea, and it's an anthology. Let's see. Articles 3, and it's called What Am I Supposed to Think About My Body? I think that's a wonderful title. By David E. Sleeper. I think that's interesting. It's on page 101. It's a strong article that I believe would be an excellent approach to use for one new in CS, or curious about how the religion handles the human body when it says there is no matter. Just one or two things. I really suggest the whole thing is just well built up in argument. But there are one or two, I didn't check them. Oh, he uses one or two examples. For example, the idea, so you might wonder, what good does it do to insist, as Christian Science teaches, that man is entirely spiritual, not material? Well, what good does it do to insist on the facts about the shape and rotation of the earth? It still looks as though the earth stands perfectly still and is relatively flat, but we know that the appearance is a deception. To be error-free, that is, undeceived regarding the earth, we must hold to the scientific facts. That calls for turning from the physical sense evidence and acting instead upon what is known to be true. Great expansion of thought and discovery have followed a correct view of the earth, and it will of the body also. And he uses an example of a calculator. But if we feed in the wrong information, the displayed answer won't be correct. So if you want to know the product of 9 times 17, but by mistake you insert 9 times 178, you'll get a wrong answer. And presumably we would know enough to tell at a glance that it's not correct. However, if you believed the displayed answer was accurate and acted upon it as though it were true, you'd suffer the consequences. Finally, a material body only expresses a material and mortal mind. You embrace your body and your thought, and you should delineate upon it thoughts of health, not of sickness. You should banish all thoughts of disease and sin, and other beliefs included in matter. From Mary Baker Eddy. It's a much longer article than that, but that is the gist of just straightforward talk about this human body and how we should handle it as we reach for spirit and understand its place in the spiritualization of our thought. I didn't mention that in the wrestling that took place with Jacob, that his thigh was put out of joint. Do you remember that? It's not included. And there is I hope I'm not giving you false information. Maybe I better not. But there's a tradition, I think it's in Judaism, that he always limped thereafter because his thigh was out of joint. And there is a sacrifice or a piece of meat, I can't remember which it was, which is called Jacob's thigh, and is offered. You see, it's down in the material. And that sounds like cannibalism to me. So don't take that as the true word, because I can't believe it after I've said it. But I know I was shocked to know that they carried the physicality over from the story to offer a spiritualization incident and how it takes place. He's one of the patriarchs. The three that are mentioned, and it's Abraham, Jacob, I don't remember the third one. And I just said it at Bible study yesterday. I can't remember but he's top banana right next to Abraham. Mostly, I think, because he produced the 12 tribes of Israel. And what patriarch is a father of a religion, an originator of a religion. A matriarch would be the mother of a religion or of a family. So it can be, because Abraham is the original one. But then coupled with him throughout the Bible is Jacob, is right with him. We have to really examine as to what put him up there in that wonderful position. And I think it was his realization, doing the will of God is what he was supposed to do. And his reward, I think, for us is the production of Joseph. Because and it's so interesting to me that Isaac just kind of disappears as a force for good. Now, and I didn't know whether people were interested in ages of these people, but Isaac was far advanced in life, up in the 50s or something like that, when he left his mother's home to go and find a wife back in her territory rather than in Canaan where he was. And people lived to be 140, just unbelievable. Now, whether their age calculation was different, I don't know, and I'm not terribly interested in it, except in the case of Caleb, who says he's old and healthy because he followed God's will. That I'm interested in. But it might be a calculation of half years, somebody says. It just divided in half, and that's what it would be. But I don't know that that's true. In the case of, do find some truth in the biblical scholars who say that Isaac never quite got over his almost being killed by his father as a sacrifice, and he couldn't spiritualize very well after that. I think it scared him half to death. Now, it wouldn't bother Jacob, he said. He would say, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" Jacob had that push, which when it was turned in the right direction, allowed him to produce a very interesting young man, namely Joseph.